Thank you very much. Bye, Nandi. It's always interesting hearing, other people describe you, their sense. So, yeah, I appreciate that. And yeah, my name means she who is protected or guarded by the sun. So when you get ordained, you get given a name. You don't know what your name's going to be. It could be anything, and you sort of go into the whole ceremony where you have somebody who knows you fairly well. At least they have a sense of your spiritual potential, and what you need to do to sort of develop that potential, and then they give you a name that somehow brings that out. So she who is protected or guarded by the sun. And the sun was meant for, like, it was one of the things they said about the Buddha, the historical Buddha, that he was like a great sun that just illuminated, and shone, illuminated the darkness of people's lives, of life itself, and shone. It's also, I also understand my name to be a quality of metta. Metta is loving kindness. So if you think about the sun, the radiance of the sun, it shines, it shines and it warms the environments, it helps things grow. So that's something about that as well, the quality of the sun, light, warmth, clarity as well. And you get given a name so that you remember who you are in essence, not necessarily who you've been conditioned to be. We have all kinds of messages that come about who we are, from family, from the environment where we happen to school, friends, you're like this and you're like that. And we have our own ideas and views about who we are as we grow up as well. So, it's not that they're not, sometimes they might be helpful, but often they usually obscures who we are in essence. So part of the journey in life is really to discover who you really are. And so having a name like that sort of says, hey, there's more to you than maybe you think. You're not necessarily who you've been conditioned to be or what your environment has told you are. So, that's all very relevant, actually, for our topic and our series. We've got the whole series of talks this week as part of our urban retreat. And I've been given the first one, the sort of kick-off, as it were, called The Ancient Path. So that's my topic, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the Buddha, the historical Buddha. Really, and we're talking a bit about how it all began. What is all of this? What are we doing? And how did it all start? And what's it all really here for in the first place? Tomorrow, one of the team might correct me, but tomorrow is the cosmic path.
Oh, I don't know.
Doesn't anyone know? I think tomorrow's a cosmic path, which I think that's a great title, the cosmic path. So it's kind of saying today is like the history, the ancients. Yeah, we're going back in time today. Tomorrow, I think we're going out of time and space. Yeah, we're expanding our imaginations. And we're not necessarily just going to be rooted in the here and now and the practical things and the things that we know, okay? That's tomorrow. The third day, Wednesday, is the direct path, right? Okay, the direct path is, I might explain a bit as we go along, but it's basically saying we've got the history today, the ancient path, we've got the kind of going outside of time and space, the cosmos tomorrow, and then we're going to come back down to earth, I think, in a sense, on Wednesday. We've sort of gone so far out of space that we're going to have to come back down to earth and be a bit more direct about our approach. Yeah, so that's Wednesday, and the Thursday is the future. The future. Where's it all leading? All this journey that we've been on and Buddhism's been on. Where's it all going? Yeah? And what does the future of Buddhism look like? So the ancient path. So actually, I've spent a bit of today thinking about not being ancient. Not ancient. I've been thinking about the ancients, like, what does that mean, ancient? So it really, if you look in the dictionary, it says old or remote or the very distant, very distant. So it sort of evokes, for me, I was reflecting that it sort of evokes something that happened, it existed, but it's so distant that you're not kind of sure even how much sometimes is fact and how much is myth, yeah? So that's part of being ancient, I think. And then part of also, I think it's also saying, how has history evolved? What has it looked like, history as it's evolved? And which things are we in contact with now that we can say, oh yeah, that definitely happened, and that's how we are now as a consequence of that. We can see it very clearly. And how much is in such a distant past that we don't even know if it relates to us or not. That's what I was thinking about when I was thinking about ancients. So what kind of time period are we talking about? When I think of ancients, I think of ancient civilizations. Ancient Egypt, for example. The pyramids were, the oldest pyramids 4,500 years ago. And the newest pyramid, or the youngest pyramid, was something like, 3,000 years or something like that. So we've got things that you can go to now. You can get on a plane and you can go several parts of the world and you can see things, and you can actually not just get on a plane, actually in the UK as well, if you're in the UK, you actually see things that belong to a past that we still trying to figure out. What actually happened there? And how does it relate to us? Does it relate to us? And in what way? And when I was studying history at school, I sort of enjoyed some history. The things that were like immediate, I guess, things like we looked at the civil rights movement, looked at women's rights, all those kind of things. I thought, yes, that I can see has a direct relevance to like now. But other things that were like thousands and thousands of years old, it'd be interesting, but I would have to struggle with, sometimes I struggled with, okay, why are we studying this? How does it relate to now? How is it going to benefit me in any way? It's almost like sometimes it could get stuck in the past. That's how I felt. So it's actually only in practicing Buddhism more and more that I've actually felt like I've had a more direct relationship with the ancient past. And that's because I've got a direct relationship, I feel, or a relationship with the Buddha and with how Buddhism, has developed to the point that it can come to right here, right now, Bethnal Green, 2025. Yeah? Because we wouldn't be here, we wouldn't be in this room if it wasn't for that ancient past, as it were. And the ancient past that's been carried down very faithfully through, many, many years to the point it can come to today. So that's so we've got pyramids, 4,500 years, the oldest pyramid. Stonehenge, which is another ancient sort of mystery. It's about 5,000 years apparently. And then you've got in terms of placing the Buddhism, in terms of time, you've got various different ancient teachings, ancient wisdom, if you like. So you have ancient civilizations, and then through those ancient civilizations, you have teachings, wisdom that comes. That again, I think we're still benefiting from. So Buddhism was 2,000. The Buddha was born 2,600 years ago. So very, very, definitely ancient. 500 years before Jesus Christ, and about 1,000 years before the Prophet Muhammad, the birth of Islam. But actually, even thinking about that, it's like all these things happened that are still playing out, still expressing themselves now. Yeah, we're still fascinated by Stonehenge, still in places like that, still fascinated by the pyramids, still learning from all those famous teachers. So that made me think today when I was thinking about it. I think, oh, it's interesting because we can think now, aren't we advanced? Yeah, we can think like I can just pick up my phone and I can know what's going on the other side of the world. That, thousands of years ago would have been completely unthinkable. They probably wouldn't have been able to get their head around that. They wouldn't have been able to get their head around like even, flying, being a contraption and flying in the air and just everybody doing that as routine. They wouldn't have the fact that we're now walking about with something to our ears. You have, like when I first saw it, somebody with their earphones and talking in the street to no one, but they've got the earphones. I was like, what are they doing? And I suddenly was like, oh my God, this was years ago, obviously, but they're with AirPods. They're talking to somebody else. Like just little things like that we completely take for granted that actually shapes our lives, informs our lives, shapes our lives. The ancients would have not been able to factor that in. They wouldn't have been able to imagine that. So that makes us feel like we're pretty advanced. We're sophisticated, we're developed. We are progressive, science and technology progressing all the time. Now we're trying to, people like me anyway, trying to get our heads around AI, It's just progressing faster and faster and faster. And we're like, wow, we can't even keep up, basically, with all the developments that are happening. Aren't we sophisticated? Aren't we developed? Aren't we clever, in a sense? But are we? Are we really? That's the question that I was having today. Because I thought to myself, well, actually, if you go back a few thousand years, we still, here today, with all our advances, we don't actually know how the pyramids were made. They couldn't make it now, apparently. With all our advances, we could not create something like the pyramids. They still don't really understand how all those stone circles happened. And how people, without any technology, without all our understanding of engineering, they don't know how they moved these huge boulders from one place to the other. So that suggests to me that there's something, and actually these days, and the other example is like these days, I think it'd be hard to proclaim that you're a prophet these days. Do you think? It'd be hard to, I could go on YouTube, or one of us would go on YouTube and be like, I've found the truth. But within that, you'd have loads of comments, going, sort of criticising and saying, no, it's not, you've not got truth, that person's got truth. I just think somehow or other, we have these great teachers that people sort of think, well, yeah, you might not actually subscribe to their philosophy, but you sort of respect the fact they had a huge influence on millions and millions of people, and they're still having a huge influence on millions of people. So we can think we're very advanced, but if you go back, okay, we don't understand pyramids, we don't understand stone circles, and we're not producing prophets in the way that they seem to be every 500 years or so. So what is that? So and in a way, the Buddha, the historical Buddha, really emerged in that kind of context. He emerged in a context where somehow or other, yes, you might have only been able to know what was going on in your immediate village, because you didn't have, all the media and things we have today. You might not have been able to, certainly probably wouldn't have been able to get cured from various ailments that they can today. But somehow or other, they also had a level of awareness, a level of consciousness that produced these wise sages and that produced incredible civilizations and structures. So that says to me, this consciousness that they had back then was of a different sort of. It was a consciousness that we may, in some ways, not so in touch with today, or that we're wanting to be in touch with today, which is why we still study the great sages and prophets, because something that they had then still speaks to us. It's almost like they discovered something about what it is to be alive, something about the mystery of life that we're still trying to work out. And they're certainly discovered, the ancient wisdom certainly is discovering something about what it is to be human and how to really develop our potential. So this is the context of the historical Buddha Shakyamuni. And he did three things, really, or three reasons why we bring him to mind. He had a life, he lived his life, and in his life, he had all various interactions, various experiences, and he rediscovered, and we say rediscovered, this path to enlightenment. So, enlightenment doesn't belong to Buddhists. This doesn't belong to Buddhists. It's basically it's the human being fully developed, fully evolved. What the Buddha did was discover the path to that, rediscover the path to that. Because things die out, knowledge and understanding dies out. In the same way we've lost track with how did they do that? How did they do these pyramids again? How did they do that civilization? In the same way we've lost touch with that and we couldn't reproduce it now, in the same way we can lose touch with enlightenment, with the possibility of what it is to be fully evolved as a human being. So we remember him because, we bring him to mind because he rediscovered the path to enlightenment and he taught it. So that's the other key reason. He didn't just discover it for himself. There may have been others before him who discovered it for themselves, but they didn't teach it. So then it dies out with them. So he discovered that. So we bring him to mind for that reason. We bring him to mind as well because he taught it, and he taught a range. They say something like there's 84,000 teachings. He just kept teaching from the moment he became enlightened to the moment, in fact, his very last breath, he was teaching. And so he taught in lots of different ways because he really understood that, we as human beings, that we're just very, what's the word? There's all kinds of human beings. We're vastly different. We've got very different temperaments, very different circumstances. And so he taught individuals that he met, taught to situations that occurred, knowing that, okay, I'm teaching for that person, but somebody else will benefit in the future. So we remember him for the teachings he gave, and we remember him as well for the community that he developed. And this community, this spiritual community, was very much, so not everybody joined the community, so that's one thing. He taught whoever wanted to be taught. And some people were so moved, so impacted, and so sort of woken up by his teachings that they asked to join the community. And they would say, in the teachings you have in the scriptures, they have people's hair stood on end. They started crying. They just couldn't go back to the life that they had. They had to somehow follow him, not actually follow him as the man, but follow the example that he set and the teachings. So those are the reasons we bring the historical Buddha to mind. For the fact of him rediscovering this path and teaching it, and then the teachings themselves, and then the community. And the community that he formed, this spiritual community, all the many men and women that followed him, it had quite an impact on the society. So not everybody became a follower of the Buddha, but the spiritual community and his teachings in general had far-reaching implications for the whole society. So this is what you could say. This is one representation of the Buddha, and in a way, this building, this sort of this center, the movement that this is part of, really looks right back to the ancient to the ancient times, to the historical Buddha. Because there's, in a way, and this is why I think we're still fascinated by the ancients, because there's something about the ancients, and particularly the historical Buddha as one of those great sages, whereby within their life, within their teaching, within what they created, is like a blueprint for us today. It's like a keys, some magic keys almost, that if you have the keys, it opens up these great doors, it opens up these great treasures. Or even another way of thinking about it is like a code. And I think a code is quite a helpful way to think about the teachings, actually, and the Buddha's teachings, because you can pick up the books like the Pali Canon, which is like a lot of the recorded teachings of the Buddha. But what I found when I've picked up certainly in the early days, when I was picking up some of the texts, I struggled to make sense of it for myself. Like I liked some of the stories, or some of the teachings, but it'd be like, okay, how do I apply that? So, because it's in such a different time, in such a different context, you can make sense of them because we've now got great translators. But actually in the past, the translators weren't, they were on a journey as well. So they were finding these great texts, and they were trying to then, which, lived 2,600 years ago, and they were trying to then, how do we translate this in a way that every person in this room can get something from? Because it does pertain to all of us, and yet it needs to be translated in some way because we're living in such a different time, such different conditions. So a code is quite a good sort of analogy, I think, or metaphor, because with a code you have to apply yourself to it. You try different sort of like if you think about getting a code for a safe, that's what it is, isn't it? You try different sort of combinations, and then a certain combination. That's it. That's the teaching for me. That's the teaching that's going to work for me. And in a sense, that's why there's so many different teachings, because different teachings work for different times and for different people and for different contexts. But all of that is there in the life and work of the historical Buddha. If you like, it's not just a code for us as individuals to find the teachings that speak to us and the practices that work for us. It's also for the development of Buddhism as well. So you're going to probably see that across the week, that Buddhism develops in such different ways, but all of it, you can see the clues, the keys in the original historical Buddha. So if you can cultivate a connection with the historical Buddha, it really takes you quite a long way, because within that story, within his story, within the teachings, there's something that can work for you at any stage of your life. I think. So who was the Buddha? Is there anyone here fairly new to the Buddhist Center, by the way? Okay. Oh, good. Great. Welcome. So I'm going to say who he was. So his name was Shakyamuni, and he belonged to the Shakya clan. That's a tribe that he belonged to. He was born in what we now call as modern-day Nepal, and born in a very wealthy, family. They said he was like a prince, but wealthy kind of context. His mum, though, died in childbirth. So there's a sense, I think, even from that time that maybe, things weren't, not everything was going to go as plain sailing for him in a sense. His mum died in childbirth, so there was some early suffering there. But he was raised by his father and his aunt, became his stepmother. And all accounts is that, he was happy sort of growing up, a sort of a happy context, basically. And we know most of Buddhism wasn't written down for 500 years. So we know the kind of facts, if you like, from things that were then written down 500 years after he died. And it's a great story, the way that they recounted everything, because after he died, because it was an oral culture, so everything was taught orally, apparently they said after he died, 500 monks and nuns came together, enlightened monks and nuns, 500 of them, and his key disciples came together, and they shared all the stories. They shared all their memories. They shared everything they'd heard. And they kept doing that. They kept meeting every year until finally it was written down. So that's how we know a lot about Siddhartha. Well, Shakyamuni was his name that he got as a Buddha. His actual name was Siddhartha when he was born. So he was born, doting family, had everything he needed to live a life well, knew what he was going to do. He was going to follow in his father's footsteps, a great ruler. And he got married, had a child. So, his life was set. But, sometimes when your life is set and you think it's set, and you think, okay, this is what I'm going to do for the next however long, this is out the shape of everything, something happens. Something happens that changes all of that. And for Siddhartha, what happened for him was a question. And it's a question I think many people ask themselves. It might be a 3 o'clock question, 3 a.m. question, when you wake up in the middle of the night and you just have a question that comes. And the question was, is this it? Is this what I should be? Is this life? What I have now, is this how it's going to be from now on? Should I just be satisfied effectively with this? So it's just a simple question, but somehow the question really goes in. So I'm pretty sure we've all had something like that, some what we call existential questions, some question that's about our lives, our existence. But sometimes those questions come in and then they just go. They come in, I don't want to think about that now. Let me just have my breakfast. They just go. But for him, that question came in and he couldn't let it go. And he goes on a series of journeys. So he goes out the palace and he first, with his attendant, and the story is that he doesn't, his father wanted to keep him quite close, closeted even, you could say, because when he was born, his father got some fortune tellers, said, tell me about the future of my son. And said, oh, he's going to be a great ruler. He's going to be just like you, amazing, even better. Or he's going to give it all up and go wandering like a sage. And his father was like, well, no, that is not happening. We're going to keep him just comfortable, having everything he wants, so he won't even have any dissatisfaction. That's the story. So he goes out with his attendant and he goes outside for the first time, they say, really taking in life. Now, the reality is he probably did have all kinds of different experiences. It's much more that because he had the question, he was seeing things differently. And that will happen to us too. If you have a question and you take it seriously, it changes your perception. It's like you're open to new information that you didn't see before. We've all had something like that, experiences like that. So that's what happens to him. He goes out and he sees for the first time somebody who's sick. And he says to his attendant, what's wrong with them? Why they bent over? Why they might have been vomiting in the street or whatever it was. What's wrong with them? He goes, oh, they're sick. And the Buddha's confused apparently by that. Siddhartha's confused by that. And the attendant says, oh yeah, that's going to happen to you one day. Yeah, you've got a body, so we'll get sick. You can't avoid it. So that shakes him up because he's healthy and he's strong and he's never really experienced that. So that really shakes him up because remember, he's got this question. So he takes in the response. So the next time he goes out, he then sees an old person bent over, wrinkled, and he says, what's up with that? What's wrong with them? He says, oh, they're old, they've aged. And that too will happen to you because you've got a body. So you too will look like that one day. Well, he can't get his head around that. And he's like, my goodness, he's shocked by that. And I think I like that one because I think it's really hard to imagine yourself, 20, 30, 40 years older. And it's certainly hard, if you're young, it's certainly hard to imagine yourself not able to, your body not working and not able to function. And we don't want to take that in, so we push that one out. But he took that truth in. And then the third journey is he goes out again and he sees a dead person. Same thing. What's wrong with them? They're not moving. Like, yeah, they're dead. And we're all going to end up like that. So that's the biggest truth that we can't take in. We can't imagine it. So again, we keep it outside our experience, our conscious mind. But Siddhartha, again, doesn't. And he goes back home. He can't settle back because he sees his son. He sees his wife. He sees his dad. He sees all the people he loves. He sees the palace. He sees this future that was ahead of him, of this work and career that he was going to have. And he's like, well, I don't understand why all that's there if it's going to end up with me on a stretcher being taken out in the streets and people wailing. He's really struggles to fit it all together. So then he goes on his final outing, as it were, and this time he sees, he's really I imagine he's really weighed down by this point because not only is he struggling, he's asking his attendant, well, what should we do about this? I imagine that he's looking around for the answers, and the attendant's probably going, just get on with things, just get on with life. It just happens. Nothing you can do. And he can't accept that either. There must be a reason why we're here beyond just doing stuff. Just by going through our various phases of life. There must be something else. Because I often think, when it really dropped into my consciousness, I think, oh, this is it. It's like one day I was going up an escalator. And I was looking at the adverts and I was thinking about whatever it was. And suddenly the escalator end just came like that. And I thought, oh my God, that's what it must be like. You're sort of thinking about what you're going to do, thinking about what's happened. You're looking at the adverts, da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da. And next thing you're off. And you can't get back. You can't go, hang on a minute, I didn't do that bit as well as I wanted to. I didn't solve that relationship. You can't go back. So I feel like he's really shooken up and no one has the answers around him. And that makes him feel that he's got to do something about it. He goes out again, and this time he sees a wandering mendicant. He sees somebody, well, he doesn't know what it is actually. He just sees a man with a bowl who's walking in the hustle and bustle of the streets as if, with ease, with calm, with great contentment and a sense of peace. And he says to his attendant, well, what's he doing? He goes, oh, he's searching for the truth. And that's it. He's given everything up and he's searching for the truth. And the Buddha, Siddhartha, knows that's what he's got to do. So I imagine it wasn't easy. I imagine it wasn't easy leaving everything. I imagine he thought he was not going to be popular. He definitely wasn't going to be popular. I imagine he thought it might even cause his wife, his child, his father, deep unhappiness. I imagine all that was going on. But at the same time, I also imagine that he could see, and remember we're in the time of the ancients. So this is really important. We're in the time where it's spiritually, there's like a ferment going on. Even in India at that time, there were the Vedas, they kind of seek the texts of knowledge. So, and people were like really exploring what it is to be human. They were really trying to find truth. And so it was a whole tradition of people that would just leave home and be in search of the truth. And they would be supported because people said, well, I can't leave home, but you're doing it on my behalf. That was the sort of culture. And you're doing it on my behalf, and somehow we're all going to benefit from your discovery. So that was the context he was in, a real spiritually vibrant atmosphere, context, the time of the ancients where there was a sense that humans were capable of anything in some way. They might not have been capable of making a mobile phone, but they were absolutely capable of creating great civilizations and discovering and rediscovering enlightenment. So he does leave home, and then he goes on this journey, and it's not an easy journey. He has to find teachers who can help him understand how to work with the mind, because one thing he seems to know is that the answers aren't out there. He has this life of pleasure. He knows that the answer's not in this life of pleasure. That's what he had. And he knows that the answer's not out there, so he finds teachers, and they teach him meditation. They teach him a version of the mindfulness of breathing that we did earlier. And he does really well in these meditations. He actually excels to the point that his teachers say, look, you're actually, why don't you lead with us? They're leading communities, join us. And he says no, because he understands that he still hasn't really found ultimate truth. He's found how to work with his mind and how to get to different levels of consciousness. And it's very specific about that as well. But actually, when the meditation finishes, he's still figuring, he still can see their suffering. So he knows that the answer isn't just in blissful states, pleasurable states. And then he goes, well, the answer's not in pleasurable states. The answer may be I've got to overcome the body. Because the thing about suffering is that there's so much suffering in the body. At some point, this is what his first experiences showed him, is that the body will give us suffering in some way. So he says, maybe I've got to subdue the body. So he goes on this whole ascetic journey where he's really, trying to mind over matter. But that doesn't work. He really actually just really suffers, actually, and gets very weak and realizes that the truth can't be found if your body's weak. We need our bodies in order to grow as humans. So then he's on it, and then by that time he's already had all this following. Actually, he's got a whole following of people who think he's amazing because he's able to do all these feats that others aren't able to do. But then they leave him because he's no longer following. He's no longer doing the thing that they thought he was about, and he's on his own. And it's in this space that he basically finds the key to his next phase of the journey. And there's lots we can say about these keys. In a way, you could say he found a few keys, but the one key that he found was a very simple one in a sense. He remembers himself as a child, and he remembers that he was sitting one day looking at his father ploughing, or somebody ploughing. And he remembers the kind of exertion they had, and the exertion of the ox. He remembers that. But he also remembers a kind of rhythm of the plough, the kind of this natural kind of rhythm that was going on. And in this memory, he remembers that as a child, he just naturally entered a higher state of consciousness. Just naturally. Without any force, without any pressure, without any I've got to do this. It just happened very, naturally. And in that story, in that memory, he realized that the key that he was looking for was this thing called the middle way. Was the way he needed to develop was between the extremes of, if you like, pleasure and pain, between effort and will and relaxation. It was a middle, and it's almost like not quite the middle. It's not like a compromise. It's much more like you take two opposites and something else emerges. Something new emerges. That was the key. And in a way, that's what he then eventually sat with, and sat under the tree, under the Bodhi tree, and eventually found the path. And there's lots of things that said about what he discovered in that enlightenment experience, but the key thing is he emerged from that a different kind of human. He emerged from that someone who no longer experienced suffering. He still experienced pain. So, later on in life, he had a bad back. He talks about having a bad back, talks about getting old and how it's like being held together by bits of string, He still had pain, but he didn't have suffering. So that's a really interesting thing to reflect on. What is the difference between pain and suffering? One thing is, and we know this in our own experience, you can have you can stub your toe, miss a train. Trains can be on strike. Something can happen that's unpleasant. But how we respond to it dictates whether it's suffering or not. Yeah. So when Abhay was talking about seeing things as they really are, and that's one of her big inspirations, in a way that's what the Buddha learnt to do. He saw things as they really are, not as he wanted them to be necessarily, not as they were in the past, as they really were now. And he no longer had this separation between self and others, which is something to imagine. And then he taught for the next 45 years. Just unstintingly taught in any situation. He met all kinds of people. And actually, when we think about the ancient early Buddhism, we're thinking about the historical Buddha, but we're also really bringing to mind some of the people he met, some of his disciples, because they too went on their journey. He taught the very first people, and one of them became enlightened straight away. And then they all became enlightened. And then they went off to teach. And then others became enlightened. Or developed, very advanced, became spiritually advanced. That is, I would say, a bit different to where we are now. People do ask at the centre, is enlightenment possible? And I think it absolutely is. But I don't know if I'd get a whole room of 500 people, who I could definitely say were all enlightened. Firstly, one's got to be enlightened oneself before you can see it in somebody else. But in those days, it seemed like with the presence of the historical Buddha, with all these enlightened individuals and the whole community that really supported people, then it seemed like, people were very open to the teachings and very open to, living and fulfilling the possibility that was there. So we bring to mind, actually, many of his disciples as well, many of the others. And women, and it was, as I said, it had a real impact on Indian society at the time because he allowed all different stratas of society to join the Sangha, to join the spiritual community, to hear his teachings. That was radical because Indian society was very strated to the point where millions of people were essentially like slaves, didn't have any rights at all. So he allowed them to practice alongside everyone else, no distinctions. So that was radical. The other thing, he allowed women to practice. Now, again, if you're a woman at that time, you really belonged to a husband, a son even. And he said, no, they can. Well, he needed a bit of persuasion, truth be told. But, he could. The question was, can women become enlightened? And he said, yes. Well, then, can you allow them to go into the homeless life, to live a wandering life, which is what they did at the time? And he said yes. I'm sure that had I'm sure that wasn't easy. I'm sure that didn't go down so well in some quarters. But as a result, women were able to become enlightened. And it's really lovely. We have still the records of many of their testimonies, where they followed the Buddha and then found the truth for themselves. Because that's the only way. Buddhism's a living tradition, and you have to find the truth for yourself. But here's one little one. She says, sleep, little Terry. Sleep comfortably, wrapped in the robe you've made. For your passion is stilled, like a pot of pickled greens, boiled dry. It's not very it's a very domestic image. She's gone on this journey. She's attained enlightenment. Her passions are stilled. It means Craving isn't there anymore for her. Her attachments have gone. She's free. And she describes it like a pot of pickled greens boiled dry. I love that. Because actually her life before then would have been in the kitchens, right? So she's using the imageries that come to her to describe her experience. Here's another one. And that's the other thing. He met all kinds of people as well along the way. So this is Suryagupta. And she says, I was well dressed and dressed up, covered with garlands and sandalwood paste, wearing everything I could put on, my servants waiting on me. So she's rich, this woman. Taking food and drink, all kinds of food and lots of it, I went from the house and up to the garden. After I enjoyed myself there playing, while on my way back home, I went into the Ajana woods near Salata to see the monastery. What I saw was the light of the world, the Buddha. I worshipped first, then I came near. The one who has an eye to see what others don't taught me the Dharma out of kindness toward me. I mastered what I heard, the Dharma of the great sage. Right there, I touched Dharma, spotless as it is, and I reached the place without death. I knew the Dharma. I went forth to homelessness. I know the three things that most don't know. What the Buddha taught is not useless. So there we have an encounter with somebody who meets the Buddha, and straight away, she doesn't even plan to meet the Buddha. She just sees this light, or receives a teaching from him, and discovers the light within herself. Because that's the point of it all. It's the path to enlightenment, if you like, an ancient path to enlightenment that the Buddha discovered, was very detailed teachings. They say 84,000 teachings, something for everybody, as it were, whatever you're going through. But we need, it's like a code. It's like you get the teaching by itself needs to be applied. And it needs to be applied in your context, in your circumstance, in your current set of conditions, and with your current personality and temperament. And if you apply the Dharma to, and this is the practice as well, to all those things, then you find the truth for yourself. You see the truth for yourself. You wake up as well. And you seeing one truth for yourself means that you're then confident. It's what you talked about earlier as well. It's like you think, oh, this works. I remember the first time I got into a sort of high sort of meditation experience. You know, I was kind of like, oh, I don't know, I can meditate, I can sit there and I can go through the motions and I can, you know, my mind's going, I can try and do something in my mind, and at the end the bell goes and it's like, oh, okay, well that was that. Did my best, you know. And the first time whereby that wasn't the experience, the first time where that was going on at the beginning and suddenly I entered a deeper level of consciousness and my mind opened up, I was like, wow, it works. But I had to go through all the practice, all the other working with the distractions and working with fidgeting, all those things. I had to go through that and, you know, sort of be in a context whereby other people thought it was useful to keep doing that, hear their experiences, so I could see others were making progress, for me to keep making effort, for me to keep going, okay, when I make too much effort, I get tense, and when I make not enough effort, then this happens. And I had to go through that myself, and that's what the Buddha taught, of course. He taught all these things, so it's like, oh, it works. And actually, when you discover a teaching and have the experience of it, then faith develops, joy develops. Joy develops not because you've don't have any issues in your life anymore to deal with. But joy develops because you're confident there's a way forward. You're confident that the teachings, these ancient teachings, work. And they work for you in your current situation. So you don't have to go anywhere else necessarily, the other side of the world. You don't have to be somebody else with a different past. I used to think that. I think if only I'd had this experience growing up, and if only I'd had that, suddenly it was like, oh no, it's like a code we have to apply and work out. And once we get the right combination, the truth opens up. And the truth is like jewels, it's like a treasure. And the great thing is, you keep discovering these jewels, these treasure. And that's actually where happiness lies. Not in necessarily all the circumstances of one's life suddenly being all great. Because remember, even if they were, we still have a body. Things don't last. Yeah. All things are impermanent. So it is like the discovery of the kind of wisdom within, the compassion within, these sort of applying the code to our situation and realizing there is a way for us to discover who we are. And there is a way to discover what lies at the mystery of ourselves that unlocks our potential, but also the mystery of life itself. And that's why we revere and acknowledge and appreciate the historical Buddha and all that he did, because of these keys that he left us. And many of them, at least 84,000 they say, many of them. But also, we also revere because there's a lineage that goes all the way from the Buddha right to here. So the teachings that we practice here and the teachings we teach, many of them were given to us by our teacher, Sangharakshita. And his teachers, many of them were Tibetan, there was Chinese and Indian. So he draws on all of their lineage, and their lineage literally goes all the way back to the Buddha. So we are in touch with the ancients. We here can access that for ourselves. It's not so distant. In fact, it's right here, right now. And we've just got to practice and open up our own imaginations and our own minds and our own hearts to it.